Hey everyone, today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read this month in January. And I read a total of 5 books, I believe. Yep, 5 books and 2 short stories. So, I'm going to be talking about these books in the order that I read them in. And I'm also going to link my Goodreads down below. I did pretty thorough reviews for these books down on my Goodreads. If you want to check that out, I've probably mentioned a lot of things in those reviews that I might not be talking about here, that I might not remember to mention. And I'm not going to be going super into detail with these reviews here. I'm just going to try to keep this relatively brief since I'm talking about several stories here, as usual, with monthly reading wrap ups. And yeah, let's just jump into it, guys. So, the very first book I read this year was quite the book, and that is 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. This is my first time reading a book by Jules Verne, and this one left me very conflicted. I have a lot of very mixed emotions and feelings about this book, but I will say, more than anything, if I had to summarize it, this book, or the story, sucked me in. It would not let go, and it left quite the impact on me. So, I feel like that says a lot right there. That doesn't happen very often, and this book managed to do that. Um, Perhaps because of that, though, it was just a very mixed experience. This book was very tedious, difficult to get through at times. It wasn't very long. The book is only about 250 pages, or at least this edition of it. From what I've learned afterwards and was looking up on the internet, apparently there's different editions of this book. It was originally written in French and then translated into English, and there are different translations of it. This edition says it's complete and unabridged. I don't know if it's considered one of the good translations, though. I was reading that there are some that kind of butcher Jules Verne's original story, and I don't know if this is considered like one of the faithful versions of it. And if you guys know, down in the comments, please let me know. If you know anything about the story, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and the different versions of it, let me know if this Airmont Classics, supposedly complete and unabridged, if I truly read the original story or not, because now, if I haven't, I need to go and find one and reread it. But I will say that this book was an incredible experience. This was a reading experience unlike anything ever. Yeah, I really felt it's basically about this crew who are on a submarine for a very long time, I believe 9 or 10 months. And I felt like I was there with them that entire time. It just such a vivid and realistic experience. Very, very grounded, very like scientific, a lot of scientific terminology and stuff in here. And I just felt like I was right there in the submarine with these characters the entire time. The characters were all pretty believable and felt like real people for the most part. And like I said, it's just kind of a conflicting experience because it sucked me right in and was very enjoyable. But on the other hand, it really felt like I was there on that submarine with them, and it was so tedious to get through at times. Those 10 months, you really felt that length of time that they were there. There's a lot of very repetitive description in this book regarding marine and animal life in the underwater world and the algae and plants and all that kind of thing. Just a lot of very repetitive description, and it got to be a little bit of a slog to get through at some points. But on the other hand, it also felt very realistic, because what would happen if you were on a submarine for such an extended period of time? You would see a lot of the same scenery over and over again, and it would become maddening. And some of the characters in here do begin to kind of experience that sort of like cabin fever type thing, where they're trapped and they start going a little bit crazy, and conflict brews between them a little bit. And yeah, so very, very interesting book. Very glad I'm read this classic. Like I said, this is my first time reading a Jules Verne book, and I have a review of this up on Goodreads if you guys want to read that, which is I probably talk about this book a lot more in that review. And yeah, this was a great book. I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. I had a really hard time figuring out what I was going to rate this book, but just for the impact this book had on me alone and how well it captured my imagination, even with all of the scientific terms I didn't understand, and like taxonomic name or scientific names or whatever of the animals and everything, and it does do that a lot. The majority of the time we're talking about all of the different fish and whales in this book, it's listing the scientific names of the animals, and I'm not that familiar with the scientific terminology, so I didn't even know a lot of the time exactly what these different fish looked like. But this book still managed just to really capture my imagination. So, I don't know. There's something pretty impressive and remarkable about that, in my opinion. So, yeah, I ended up settling on a 4 out of 5 stars for this book. And this, honestly, we'll see how the rest of the reading year goes. It's still only January, but this might end up making it onto one of my favorite books of the year. But just because of how tedious it was at times and mind-numbing with just the repetitive description, yeah, it wasn't perfect for me. But yeah, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. This is a great book. I don't think it's for everyone, but it was good. I don't know what else to say about it. So yeah, that was the first book I read this year. The second book I read this year, something completely different. I had to relax a little bit and not read something so intense and long. So I just decided to read one of these, a Boxcar Children book. I was going through some of my old books recently and discovered I had a few of these. I have not read any of these as an adult. I used to enjoy these books as a kid. And as you guys probably know, those who follow my channel, I still enjoy reading kids' books on occasion. I read, obviously, a lot of Goosebumps, and apart from Goosebumps, I read other children's books as well and things like that. So I decided to reread one of these, and I just picked one up at random. I have a few of them. And this one is number 7 in the series, The Woodshed Mystery, and I did not like it. It was not good at all. These books were written, I believe, in like the 70s. 60s and 70s. This one is early 60s. And this book is just incredibly shallow. There's really nothing to it. Each of these books kind of revolves around a mystery. It's a very like Scooby-Doo type mystery, very kind of family friendly. There's really not much of a threat or anything. It's basically this group of kids is just trying to solve this random mystery in each of these books. And it's just not interesting at all. The mysteries don't really make any sense, and the clues that they discover, and there's really just no rhyme or reason to anything that I noticed. And everything is just so happy-go-lucky, family-friendly in these books. Every character is just like so innocent, and it's just so shallow and dull. And I get these books were written in a different time frame. They come from the 60s and 70s, and they're targeted at a very young audience. I understand that. But I still don't really find that an excuse for just how shallow these books are, honestly. There are other children's books I can think of. Specifically, the ones that come to mind are the Beverly Cleary series of books, the Henry Huggins and Ramona books. Those books are incredible, have aged much better than these, and have a lot more depth to them. And I still really enjoy those ones. And they were written around a similar time frame, I believe, in the 70s. Like late 60s, early 70s, I want to say. And yeah, so there's other kids' books out there that are way better than this one. I would not recommend these Boxcar Children's books. They live better on in memory. They're not ones I'll continue to reread. I'll probably honestly just get rid of my small collection of these. And yeah, if I ever had kids one day, I would not want them reading these books because they're really not that good. There's a lot better kids' books out there. So I ended up giving it a 1 out of 5 stars. So that was the second book I read. The next 2 stories I read were actually short stories, and those were short stories by none other than H.P. Lovecraft from my big book of H.P. Lovecraft's Complete Fiction. And I have a bookmark in here because I'm currently reading another one of his stories, At the Mountains of Madness. I just started it, and it's quite good so far. But the 2 stories I read out of this book this month were The Dunwich Horror and The Whisperer in the Darkness, or Whisperer in Darkness, something like that. The Dunwich Horror was pretty good. I really enjoyed that one. Quite a bit different than most of Lovecraft's stories. It was very direct, very action-packed. It didn't really have a lot of that subtlety and atmosphere buildup that a lot of his other stories tend to have. It was just very action-packed and basically kind of a spoiler alert, I guess. Basically, there's a monster, or cosmic like entity or whatever that's summoned by means of a ritual in the Dunwich Horror, and he basically wreaks havoc on this small town. He just goes batshit crazy, destroying people's houses and everything, and it is awesome. Very, very fun book. It was not quite as creepy as some of his other stories, but I really enjoyed it. The Dunwich Horror was very entertaining. It kind of fizzled out a little bit by the end. It was a little bit anticlimactic and almost was kind of reaching into the territory of being a little bit silly, almost going kind of too far with things, and the ending just felt a little bit rushed. But it was still very good. I really enjoyed the Dunwich Horror. Again, it kind of lacked some of that atmospheric tension and just overall unsettling feeling that you often get with the Lovecraft story. But I really enjoyed it just because it was different, and I wasn't expecting it to have like just so much action in it, honestly. And there was some really creepy stuff in it too, regarding like the Necronomicon and things like that. And yeah, it was a great story. The Whisperer in Darkness is kind of the opposite of the Dunwich Horror. That was the next one I read. And The Whisperer in Darkness is told through a series of letters like some of his other stories, kind of similar to the Call of Cthulhu. Not exactly the same, but kind of in that fashion. And it was very slow build up. Honestly, The Whisper in Darkness, I believe, was kind of a longer Lovecraft story. I want to say around 50 pages. Still a short story, but on the longer end of being a short story. And it was kind of a slow build up. But once we got to like the final act of the story, it got good. a much creepier and more satisfying conclusion than what we saw in the Dunwich Horror. So, like, in terms of tone and story structure and almost everything, it feels like the complete opposite of the previous story, the Dunwich Horror. But it was really good. I really enjoyed it. And this one leaned more into sci-fi. The Dunwich Horror felt like more of a straight horror story, I guess, with some elements of fantasy or sci-fi or whatever. The Whisper in Darkness definitely leaned more into sci-fi territory, and sci-fi is not even one of my favorite genres or anything, but it was very effective in this story. I really enjoyed it. Again, the conclusion was absolutely terrifying. It was a little bit predictable, I will say that. I kind of saw it coming based on the extensive correspondence of letters and all of that stuff. It wasn't exactly a huge shocking twist, but it was still very creepy and enjoyable. And yeah, both of the stories I'd probably give like a 4 out of 5 stars. You can't really go wrong with Lovecraft, honestly. I've enjoyed most of his work so far. Again, this is a complete collection, and I've been reading through this entire book in chronological order. I started it early last year or late the previous year, 2020 maybe. I don't remember for sure. Around there, and I'm getting close to finishing it. Let me see. I've only got his novellas left. There's a few novellas left that I have to read. At the Mountains of Madness, which I'm currently working on. The Shadow over Innsmouth, Dreams in the Witch House, I believe it's called. And there's a couple others. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm almost finished with this 1,100 page mammoth of a book. So yeah, since like a year and a half ago, roughly, I've been reading through his entire work. And I have to say, I've been immensely enjoying it. Again, some stories are hit and miss. They're not all amazing or fantastic, but I've been having a good time reading through Lovecraft's work. And it's safe to say that he's one of my favorite authors. So yeah, I read The Whisperer in Darkness and the Dunwich Horror this month. Gotta find a place to set my books here. And the next book that I read was a Fear Street book, Final Grade. I just decided to read a Fear Street book. I was in the mood for one, I guess. And I'm not going to talk too much about this book. I'll just say I was not the biggest fan of it. This is definitely one of my least favorite Fear Street novels I've read so far. As you guys know, I absolutely love R.L. Stine, but this book was pretty disappointing. It started out okay. It has all of the typical Fear Street ingredients. There's a murder mystery. There's lots of teen drama. And there's always the phone calls. Every Fear Street or young adult book written by R.L. Stine has mysterious phone calls with a strange, raspy voice on the other end, threatening the receiver of the call. And yeah, that's always there for some reason. I don't know why. But yeah, this one was okay. Basically, I don't even remember the characters' names, honestly. But basically, the main character, this teenage girl, she gets in kind of like an argument with her teacher. I don't even remember the math teacher or English teacher. I don't even remember what. Man, I think that just goes to show how memorable this book was. But yeah, she gets into an argument with her teacher because he gives her a low grade, even though she worked really hard and got like all of the answers correct. And then shortly after, her teacher dies, and then everyone is kind of gossiping about her, thinking that she was involved with his death. And then someone else turns up dead, and then of course she's trying to figure out who did this, and someone is trying to frame her and make it look like she's the killer. And yeah, it was okay starting out. It was kind of interesting. But then about halfway through, the book reveals who the true killer is. And this is where it starts to get really silly. The book just kind of lost all, not that it was very tense to begin with, but it lost whatever tension it had going for it as the killer reveals himself and is very directly like threatening the protagonist and trying to get her to go along with his plans and everything. And it just got kind of goofy. As always, you have to kind of suspend your disbelief. There's a very lack of just logic behind the entire plot, and the characters make a lot of really dumb decisions, and I just was not buying it. I was not having it at all. So yeah, Fear Street final grade. I ended up giving this book a 2 out of 5 stars. Yeah, it was okay. It wasn't terrible, but definitely not one of my favorite Fear Street books that I've read. It's towards the bottom of my list for this series. So that was that book I read. The next book I read this month is The Forsaken Boy by Troy Tradup. I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name. And the author graciously sent me this book, which I very much appreciate. And this is basically a werewolf novel. And I was talking with him a little bit, the author, and I read a couple of werewolf novels last year. You guys may have seen my video reviews for those, or I believe they were in like reading wrap-up type of videos like this or something. And I was very disappointed with those books. I really did not care for them. One of them was especially terrible. The other one wasn't as bad. It was okay, I guess. But it wasn't a werewolf novel. When I go into a werewolf story, I expect there to be a story about werewolves. And one of the books that I read last year, hoping for a good werewolf horror story with, you know, the typical psychological elements and a little bit of action and blood and gore as well. And I did not get any of that. Fortunately, with this book, there's actually a werewolf story here, and it is far more competent and just satisfying than the previous 2 werewolf books that I read. And I still didn't quite love it. I had a lot of issues with this book. I was very back and forth with it. There were some parts of the story where I was pretty into it and enjoying it, and then there were other just some small things where it just kind of ruined that immersion a little bit, and I just wasn't really buying it. And this is Troy's first book. This is his debut novel. I believe this is the only novel he has published. And so I have to be a little bit forgiving. The writing is definitely not top notch or anything like that. Don't go into this expecting a book with like King quality writing or Kuntz quality writing. But it's not bad at all. It's pretty decent. The characters were a little bit shallow for my tastes. And yeah, this is basically a werewolf novel about this teenage boy who is bullied and disrespected all throughout his life. And the one thing that I did like about this novel is it takes a different angle, a different approach to things, where instead of this main character, this teenager, discovering werewolves or running from them or being like frightened by this idea, he's actually kind of enticed by it. He's introduced to this werewolf, sort of. I'm kind of remaining vague a little bit to avoid spoilers. And he's kind of tempted by this idea and almost, in a way, seeks it out and wants to be transformed into a werewolf. And so there's like a little bit of like an angsty feel to this. And yeah, I don't know. It was okay. I enjoyed it. I think I ended up giving it a 3 out of 5 stars, or like a 2.5 rounded up. Much better than the other werewolf novels that I read last year, but still not exactly what I wanted. It didn't completely satisfy my tastes. And also the ending the ending didn't really feel rushed, and it did actually have kind of a good twist at the end that I did not see coming. I did kind of like that little twist we got. But some of the action at the end, I'll just say that, some of that felt kind of glossed over. I would have liked a little bit more detail regarding some of like the final fights that took place involving the werewolf and things like that. That felt like a little bit of a missed opportunity, in my opinion. But other than that, yeah, it was just okay. I think like 2.5, rounded up to a 3 out of 5 stars. So not a bad book. This was The Forsaken Boy. And then the very last book that I read this month, aside from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, this book surprised me the most, honestly. And that is Mother's Helper by A. Bates. And this is a point horror book. For those of you who don't know, the point horror series, I feel like I have talked about it on my channel a couple times, but it's basically a series of horror books for young adults, very similar to like Fear Street or something. And this series, each book is its own individual story. Again, sort of like Fear Street. And the books are authored by many different authors. There's a lot of different people who contributed to this series. Of course, there are a lot of recurring authors as well. R.L. Stine contributed to this series quite frequently. And this is my first time reading an entry by A. Bates, and I was quite impressed by it. So I did not know anything about this book going into it. Essentially, what it's about is this teenage girl named Becky, our main character, who is helping this single mother, take care of her child, and they're living on this secluded, isolated island. And the reason for it, or the supposed reason for it, is that the mother is trying to hide out from her husband and the baby's father, because he is basically this guy who is trying to take the baby away. He's just a really messed up, evil dude. And so she hired Becky to help her take care of the baby while they're hiding out on the island, trying to, I don't know, get things figured out or get the situation resolved somehow. So I will admit this entire premise is a little bit, I don't know, kind of shaky, kind of loose, a bit strange. But there's something about this story that just really pulled me in. I was very immersed in the story that's being told here. And I think one of the things I really appreciated about this story, as well as A. Bates' writing, is you are dropped into the story immediately in the present tense through Becky's point of view. It's told in third person, but it's a very intimate third person. You get a lot of Becky's inner monologue, and it just drops you right into the action. Not that there's necessarily a ton of action going on in this book. It is a little bit of a slow burn, but it drops you right into the story. You're not bombarded with information or anything like that. There's no exposition in this book whatsoever, or info dumping, which I really appreciated. This is a kind of book, kind of author that appears to not baby the reader in any sort of way, which I really enjoyed. You kind of learn things along with your main character, and as you try to figure out what the hell is going on. Becky is the kind of character that is quite likable. I enjoyed reading from her perspective. Again, it's written in third person, but it's a very like personal type of third person view. And she's the kind of character that it feels realistic, feels likable, and she knows that something is up. And she learns that this job is very strange, and she questions herself of why she accepted this job. Obviously, it pays well, but she knows something fishy is going on here. You know, the mother is a very strange person, and you know, why do they have to be so secretive? They can't let anyone know that they're hiding out at this cabin on this island. And what is the deal with the father? Like, why does he want to come and steal the kid away? Like, there's something else going on, and Becky is gonna find out what it is. So yeah, I was very just captivated by this mystery. It worked well, I think. And it is a little bit of a slow burn. There's not a lot of stuff that happens. It's not a very eventful book, but just how smooth and easy the writing style was, and just something about it really drew me in. I really enjoyed this. Now, it wasn't perfect. Again, I don't think it's for everybody, just because it definitely lacked in the action and tension department. It did have some of that. There's also a little bit of like humor in here and kind of lightheartedness, and some of it worked, not all of it. But basically, in summary, I ended up giving this book a 3.5 out of 5 stars. And yeah, again, I have a review of this book on Goodreads as well. It's a lot more thorough than what I'm telling you guys right now, as I try to jog my memory and trying to remember everything I wanted to say about it. But yeah, Mother's Helper. This was a pretty interesting book. Probably one of my favorite point horror books that I've read so far, and probably my favorite non-Stein book, meaning this might be my favorite book in the point horror series that was not written by R.L. Stein, which admittedly I have not read a lot, but I was pretty impressed by this one. The ending, of course, we get like a twist ending revealing the way things were all along, and why they had to be secretive and what the whole deal was surrounding the father and all of that. And it wasn't exactly shocking. It was a little bit of a surprise, I guess. It wasn't exactly predictable, but you know, it wasn't mind-boggling or anything. It made sense at least. So yeah, Mother's Helper, like a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I kind of struggled between a 3 and a 4-star rating for this one, but I just ended up settling in the middle with the 3.5 stars. Surprisingly good book. Not amazing, but I really enjoyed it. So that is it. Those are all the books I read in the month of January. 5 books, and then of course my 2 Lovecraft short stories. And then I'm also currently reading At the Mountains of Madness, which is more of a novella length story by him. And that one is quite good so far. And anyways, what did you guys read in January? And what are your thoughts on any of these books that I have read? Please let me know down in the comments. And then one last thing I wanted to mention is that I will probably be taking a break from BookTube, doing videos in specifically here very shortly. You might not see any videos from me for a while. Part of the reason for this is I just need to take a break from social media in general. It's very time consuming, as many of you probably already know. And I've been wanting to focus more on writing. I've talked a little bit about this on my channel. I think that writing is just as much a love or a passion for me as reading is. And lately, I have not been writing much at all. And I need to get back into writing. I really do. So I'm going to try to step away from social media just a little bit and take kind of a break from BookTube, or making videos at least. I'll try to still watch my friends' videos, your guys' videos. But yeah, I really want to put more of a focus on writing and get some stuff done. And yeah, so you might not see any videos from me for a little while. But anyways, I just wanted to throw that out there quick. Let me know down in the comments again what your thoughts are. And I appreciate you guys watching. It means a lot to me. It's always fun making videos and discussing books with you guys. And that's pretty much all I have. So as always, guys, have an awesome day.